What does an Ehlers-Danlos flare feel like? This is a really common question that I get asked, and I think different people may answer it differently, but this is how I would answer it. So for me, an Ehlers-Danlos flare-up can mean a number of different things. It might mean that suddenly, by something outside of my control, like the weather or stress or something like that, one or more of my symptoms have become suddenly worse. So the trigger is external. It's not necessarily related to something that I have done, but it is causing a worsening of my symptoms. Sometimes it's fairly contained. For example, if it's a weather related flare, when the weather's doing its weird stuff, my body does its weird stuff. And then once the weather, I don't know, sorts itself out, my body also just goes back to relatively normal. Or sometimes, whatever that trigger is, it creates this cascade, and my symptoms almost create like a life of their own and just continue on afterwards. This is especially the case if it's like a stress related flare up and the trigger is still somewhat there. For example, when my dad died, my whole body just went massively downhill. And obviously, grief is a process that you go through. So it never really, I mean, it's never going to get resolved because my dad's never going to come back. So it's always going to be there a little bit. And it's just about my body learning to manage that. Now, sometimes I do things that cause flare ups. For example, if I decide I'm going to be really naughty and pull an all nighter, stay up all night, that would probably create a cascade of symptoms where a lot of my symptoms get worse together. Or if I suddenly decided I'm going to start training for a marathon and I don't ease into it, I just go straight into it, that would probably flare me up. Now, what's the difference between a flare up versus an injury? This is where the discussion has a little bit of nuance, because I would say an injury is a lot more proportionate, or it makes a little bit more sense, or it's perhaps a little bit more contained, as in it follows our typical rehab patterns and makes a little bit more sense, versus a flare up may not make sense, as in it may not be directly related to, for example, the joints that I've been using, as in it may not just be my ankle joints that start aching, it might be my wrist and my shoulders, even though running doesn't really involve them directly. Or another weird example is I had this hip injury that flared up when my dad died, and then I rehabbed all the way through it and it got so much better, and then I had some life stress come up and I didn't change anything else, but the hip injury reappeared. Now, what I find, and talking to other EDS people, it's a pretty common experience, is that our flare ups usually involve a common pattern of symptoms. For example, I don't get certain symptoms, but I do get migraines, fatigue, a particular issue with my hip that flares up, brain fog, and food sensitivities. They're my really common ones that I get when I'm in a flare. So when I start to piece together the pattern of, oh, I'm seeing these symptoms together, that's when I'm kind of like, okay, I'm in a flare. Recently, I've added joint subluxations to the list, which is not fun. And that actually leads to me to another thing, which is sometimes a flare up just becomes an increase in sensitivity to things going wrong. For example, I can go to the gym and do my regular workouts, and when I'm fine, they're okay. But when I'm flared up, they might create a bad cascade of bad things going on in my body. For example, my lower body has recently, during a recent bout of intense stress, started subluxing. Joints in my body have subluxed in response to exercise, whereas months before I was able to do those workouts with zero problem at all. Or another example of that is my neck may become a lot more sensitive to a migraine cascade. So certain neck postures, when I'm doing okay, they might create a bit of a stiff neck, but that's all. Whereas when I'm in a flared state, those certain postures will suddenly create this cascade that leads to migraine, sometimes cluster migraines. Now, one final thing I'll say, because this video is getting kind of long, but one final thing is these symptoms usually appear to be random until you start looking for the patterns in the right spot. So start looking out for triggers, whether it's weather, stress, certain menstrual cycle phases, or just hormones in general, so different stages of aging. Environmental triggers, fragrances, different new carpet that you put down, hay fever like triggers, etc. Or a sudden change in your behavior that has somehow put you beyond your regular capacity. Let me know what you'd add in the comments. I'd love to hear your idea of what a flare up feels like for you.